My name is Sandy Bird-Chappelle, and I am a senior program officer at the St. Luke's Foundation, responsible for our strong community strategy. And so much of what I've heard today really resonates with what the foundation wants to do in the community. I've heard things about applying an equity lens to the work, understanding the relationship between community voice and community opportunity, and the economic vitality of the community. And I hope that as you guys are listening to the presentations that you are making those connections as well. St. Luke's is a private hospital conversion foundation that's located here in Cleveland, and the foundation is dedicated to improving and transforming the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities in Greater Cleveland. And so you might be asking yourself why a hospital conversion foundation is interested in activities related to social justice and advocacy. And if you aren't wondering, let's pretend that you are so that I can explain. The answer is that health happens in community. In other words, human health is significantly impacted by the places where people live, learn, work, play, and age. And at St. Luke's, the trustees and staff believe so strongly in this theory that we've created an entire strategy dedicated to place or community. And we're strategically targeting investments to test that theory. So how many of you are familiar with the concept of the social determinants of health? Just a few. So the social determinants of health really relate to the phrase that I mentioned earlier, that health happens where people live, learn, work, age, and play. And at St. Luke's, what we've been doing is exploring what it means to invest in a non-traditional framework designed to create strong, vibrant communities of choice. And we've created three strategies that relate to this theory. One is related to improving social conditions, one is related to the physical environment, and the other is related to really looking at policy decisions that shape healthy community design. And so this framework that you see before us is a framework that was developed out of California in Alameda County in partnership with community residents in the public health department. And it really signifies a new shift in how you look at creating population health, and it recognizes the relationship between population health and the places where people live. This framework was very informative when we shaped our strong community strategy. And I want to just talk to you a little bit about what those strategies are. It turns out that this framework related to supporting strong communities looks at addressing the root causes of human health outcomes. And there's a lot of evidence that points to things other than access to care, health knowledge, and human behavior as the most predominant influences related to human health. And it turns out that the things on this side of the slide, to my left and your right, I believe, things like what we value, the policies that we create in community, the places where people live, which are heavily influenced by those same policies, and the things that we value within our families and the cultures that we shape within our neighborhoods really relate to about 70% of what happens to human beings in neighborhood. It relates to how healthy we are, though we have traditionally thought that what we needed to invest in was access and increasing people's knowledge about the behaviors and the choices that they make. And those things are important, but what the evidence is pointing to is that the most important things about shaping human health and human health outcomes really relates to the values that we hold as a community, the policies that we make, the places in which we live, and the things that we embrace as family, and the things that we embrace within culture. So what are the three strategies that we invest in? And the first thing really has to do with this whole concept of community. And for us, community is where people live, learn, work, play, connect, and age. And I want you to really remember that word connect, because it's really one of the anchor concepts within all three of the strategies that we have developed as a foundation. So the first stream has to do with really how do we foster positive social conditions. And it looks at how we support community to engage, to be in a connected relationship with those around them, to really understand what we mean by shaping the culture. What are the values that we hold? How do we want to live? What do we want to be known for within our neighborhoods as it relates to lifestyle? How do we advocate for the things that are important to us within community? And what can we learn about how we shape opportunity and how we connect with policymakers so that our communities become the thing that we hope for? The third stream has to do with supporting new and improved quality physical spaces. So it looks at things like transportation, safety, schools, healthy food options, our commercial quarters, which is where our businesses are within our neighborhoods, and the green spaces that allow us to have active and healthy lives. And again, if we as residents of the neighborhoods that we live in don't become involved in how we shape these kind of land use decisions, then others are going to make those decisions for us. And as you've heard some of our other speakers say, that sometimes people create environment and make choices for you that are not what will optimally help you live healthy, productive lives, and neither will it support the healthy, productive development of your children. And the third thing really has to do with land use decisions, or how we promote healthy community design. And those things have to do with the commerce that's available in neighborhoods, the policy considerations that shape things that can be available in neighborhood, again, the green spaces, how policies shape health implications for a community, and whether or not community residents are able to have the kind of jobs that are needed to live those healthy, productive lives that we talked about earlier. As we begun to think about how we can help residents believe that change can happen, that we can change the trajectory of the way our communities are developing, the way we are living in communities, the options that we have as community residents, we thought one of the most important things might be is to connect with people that really understand how policy shapes opportunity, and have that organization begin to work within community to help people identify the things that matter most to them, and then to become engaged as community residents with other residents, business in the community, and also our political leaders about the decisions that are happening that will shape optimal health for our communities. And that's where our next speaker, Greg Brown from Policy Bridge, comes in. What we've done most recently is to connect with Policy Bridge to work with people simply about how policy shapes opportunity, so that people can become more involved. As you guys are out here on a Friday night, I am blown away and amazed by that. But what we want to see happen is that as people begin to understand the issues of policy, the issues of land use decisions, and how these things shape the opportunities that both they and their children have to become healthy, active, and productive citizens within Greater Cleveland, that they will begin to pull other people into the work, that they will begin to have conversations that say, this is how we want to live in our neighborhood, and that as that thing begins to take on a life of its own, we'll begin to see residents engaged in issues that direct policy, in issues that shape how people live in their neighborhoods and what's available in their neighborhoods. And we found from earlier work in investing in community that people will begin to say things like what they don't want to see advertised in their neighborhood, how they want to restrict certain things to be accessible in the communities where they live. And we think that as we continue to support things that allow community to envision the life that they want, to lead the work to give voice to how they want to see their community shaped, that we will see a more active, thriving, strong communities in our neighborhoods. And we recognize that if the people are involved, we can invest in infrastructure, we can green the neighborhoods, but if it's not the values that the people hold for themselves, that over time we'll find ourselves in the same position that we are in now, in neighborhoods that are struggling to live active, productive lives and with access to things that they need, so that their children develop healthily and that they have the kind of jobs and other supports that they need for America really to be as strong as it needs to be. And so I'm going to close with that. I'm going to ask Greg to come up and talk a little bit more about what that policy initiative looks like on the ground.
Well, good evening. I'm going to go a little bit off script from my presentation because I want to spend a few minutes that I do have tonight talking in more depth about what Sandy Chappelle was talking about today. But first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Greg Brown. I'm the Executive Director of Policy Bridge. And Policy Bridge is a research and advocacy think tank that focuses on public policy issues affecting African Americans and other underserved communities, involving them in high-quality discourse that will lead to changes in their environment and catalyze action. So for us, we do research reports such as the True Wealth of Health. We also do policy briefs. We also are engaged in community forums. We do 3 to 5 of those each year where we bring people together, citizens, stakeholders, to talk about critical issues affecting issues in their community and also public policy issues. We also try to develop strategic alliances with individuals who are in organizations or in elected office so that we can see the results of our reports and the recommendations contained in our reports come to fruition. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about the connection between health and the economy as it relates to our financial and economic well-being. Then I want to talk a little bit more about the social determinants of health and their implications for what happens to us personally based on what happens in our environment and those public and private systems that impact where we live. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about some strategies we're using to try to mitigate the bad things that happen in community and try to create new, strong, vibrant communities where people live. So this slide really kind of represents the idea for most folks that there is a strong relationship between how our health is and how we are able to engage in our economic future and our economic life. There is a strong relationship, whether it's the health of the workforce, the availability of employment, whether you're at work but not feeling well, so you're not able to work at your capacity. And those things ultimately undermine our ability to be financially secure, and it also undermines corporations and businesses' ability to be productive and grow. So to that extent, the idea of our health, and when I talk about health, I'm not just talking about our physical health, I'm talking about our mental as well as physical health, has strong implications for our financial viability. When you layer upon that the issue of the shifting demographics in this country in terms of population growth, the emerging Latino population, the diminution of the Caucasian population, and the fact that there are health disparities that continue to exist in the African American and Latino communities, one starts to think about, with the changing shift in demographics, whether this, the level of health disparities will continue to grow and become explosive over some point in time. So when you really think about the issue of health, it's not just, are we in a position to do something about it, but who are all the actors that need to be involved to help us do something about it? From our perspectives, when you talk about the determinants of health, as the World Health Organization has said, the main determinants really are social and economic, deal with the social and economic environment, physical environment, and individual characteristics and behavior. And over the last few years, what we've heard more and more from people in the healthcare industry or health professionals is that we need as individuals to change our attitudes and our behavior as it relates to our health care. And I certainly understand that, and I certainly concur with that. I think all the data in the research literature supports that. But what these determinants are saying is that our changing our individual health and our individual health characteristics and behaviors alone will not improve our environment or our social condition in and of itself. And that's a very powerful statement. So we may be more healthy, but the conditions we live in and the conditions that affect our lives will not be much better. So what do you do about it? Working with the St. Luke's Foundation and citizens and stakeholders in their catchment area, Policy Bridge decided to put together a pilot and try to really work on the two things that we think are fundamentally important for people in their neighborhoods to do so that they can have input and change the conditions in their environment. The first is engage in and understand and be educated and fully aware of what public policy and community policy is. The second is then to figure out the strategies and tactics and resources required to advocate for those things that you want to see and develop the relationships with those people that you need to assure that it happens. As I was saying in class the other day, it's not about determining what you want to do. The doing is never done until the action is actually occurred. What do I mean by that? In many cases, we go into a room, we sit down, we come to agreement, and we walk away, but nothing ever happens. So the advocacy techniques really have to be about getting to something that is tangible and can be seen. So let's talk about the pilot that we're involved in the St. Luke's catchment area, because I think this is fundamentally a way to organize and to rethink how we can engage. Policy Bridge conducted a lot of research and looked at a lot of different ways to think about how do you build the capacity of individuals in their community to have the ability to change the conditions that exist in their community. And what we came with was that you needed to create an atmosphere, first of all, where people could come in and sit down and learn about those things that would be necessary to change the policy. And then secondarily, identify techniques in terms of advocacy strategies and tactics that they can use. And then thirdly, don't just create a classroom environment, but actually have them identify a tangible task or issue in their community that they want to work on and work on that project during the term. So we've created a curriculum. That curriculum is 20 weeks. It's for an hour and a half each week. We have about 15 residents in that catchment area who are participating in the training. I think one is even here tonight. And what we're trying to do is not only enlighten and engage them, but catalyze them and prepare them for action. So what's the fundamental sense beyond and behind that? We are trying to build social capital. And the way you do it, there are two techniques. One is called bonding, and the other one is called bridging. The bonding social capital is what we mostly do all the time. That means we collect among ourselves with people who are homogeneous to us, who think like us, who maybe look like us. The more difficult aspect of building social capital is the bridging social capital, because it means that you go to people who are not like you, people who may not understand you, people who may not necessarily want to help you. And so in our techniques that we're trying to engage in, Policy Bridge has determined that we have to not only foster bonding social capital, but we have to teach people the techniques of creating bridging social capital. And in doing so, based in the context of understanding public policy, people will be able to understand how to impact their communities for the better. They will be able to connect to other citizens in their community and teach them how to connect and do more. And ultimately, you start a movement where the capacity moves from the professional class to citizens and residents themselves who actually own and have the greatest vested interest in their neighborhoods. So fundamentally, we are working on that. It's a strategy and tactical approach that we're very proud of. Like I said, it's a pilot, so we are trying to measure the impact. But I also say this, and I say this very clearly, that no matter what you do as an individual, you're never as strong as you can be if you work in a collective. And the sense we have to do now is to begin to understand not only where our strengths are individually, but where our strengths as a collective, organize ourselves around those, and pursue the goals that we think are best for our communities to be healthy, economically vibrant, and safe for our families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Reverend Tony Minor. I serve as the Advocacy Director at LMM. I also serve as the Executive Director of United Pastors, one of the largest progressive pastor groups in the region. Within the context of LMM, I run and have founded a program called the Faith Hub Initiative, and that's a program that's really designed to empower congregations to address issues of health and environmental justice. One of the key things that we've found in this whole conversation is that within the context of the Black church is this thing called cultural memory, where our elders contain the history of our ties to the soil, our ties to land, and that is a key ingredient that we have not tapped. And so we are developing a couple of projects that will link young people to our elders and to begin to have those kinds of talks about how things were. As I conclude this portion, we all know that when we went over grandmother's house and we got ill, grandma either went to the garden, hello, or she went in the cabinet and got some stuff to help us, because we were tied to the land and we understood how to take care of each other. That was long before these stores began to emerge and we went and bought pills. And so being able to talk to our elders and try to harness what I call that cultural memory that will allow us to overcome during these times.
My name is Freddie Collier. I'm the Assistant Planning Director for the City of Cleveland. And much of what we focus on at the City of Cleveland has to do with physical development. We have been very industrious in the City of Cleveland. The Jackson administration in particular has actually partnered to implement over $9 billion of investment activity. Now, typically, that's something to brag about. But what this administration and the planning department in particular is really focusing on at this point is really going beyond bricks and mortar and understanding that in order for us to really create a viable and sustainable city and communities, that we have to focus on human impact. And part of focusing on human impact is understanding what the conditions that exist within the community and how the decisions that we're making are literally impacting people in their biological state. And the partnerships that we've been working with through St. Luke's Foundation, the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, the Cleveland Department of Public Health, and others, has really broadened our focus as to how we develop and plan communities. And it's my hope to be able to dialogue with you tonight to talk to you about some of those specific strategies that we're using in order to create that change, dealing with physical as well as social and economic development.
So I'm just going to start us with a broad question, and while I ask this question, if you all can be thinking about your questions, Kim actually has the mic. She'll come to you with the mic, and I'd particularly like for us to hear, since we want to engage in an intergenerational dialogue, from our young people who are in the audience as well. So I hope some young people will ask some questions. So this is a conference, as we talked about from the top, about analyzing the urban food movement from a social justice perspective. So I'm wondering if just a few of you could get us started by talking about how having a social justice lens actually has transformed how you approach the topic around urban food and the urban food movement and food injustice. In other words, if that lens wasn't there, then how does having it make what you do differently and your approach different? And maybe some of that will tie to next steps as well.
The city of Cleveland, much like Detroit and other Rust Belt cities, has an abundance of vacant land. The city of Cleveland has over 20,000 vacant parcels. We have about 12 to 13,000 of those parcels in city control. Unlike Detroit, we believe that we have developed a process that allows residents and people in the neighborhood to access land cheaply. We are ranked #2 in urban agriculture nationally, so there is a growing urban agricultural movement here locally. One of the things, though, that we begin to really look at is understanding that proximity to gardens does not equal necessarily access for all. So although we have an abundance of gardens, we've been really trying to examine how are people accessing these gardens. Are health conditions changing in the community as a result of this movement? So there's a lot of evidence-based work that we're beginning to embark on. But in order for us to successfully be able to provide, the evidence base and come up with the strategies necessary to shift that power and get it into the hands of people in the neighborhoods, to watch those conditions change, it takes non-traditional partnerships. And one of the speakers said something that was really, interesting. I think it was Greg, who really talked about partnering with people who may be opposed to what you're doing because of their rank and their position. It's sometimes necessary, but we have to begin to sort of think about how those non-traditional partnerships can actually help us broaden our understanding, because we're in a day and time where no one entity or organization can do anything alone. Resources are too scarce, and people need to depend on each other, as well as organizations needing to depend on each other for knowledge and expertise.
Someone else want to talk about how a social justice lens has changed the work you do or enhanced the work you do?
I mean, it's essential. I mean, I guess there's kind of two veins that are happening in cities now. There's folks who are foodies, who are interested. Urban farming, sexy, it's cool. Let me go and start farming, and there's relevance within the social justice context for that on a continuum, but it's not social justice. So I think that when you're talking about justice, and you're talking about equity, and you're talking about dismantling racism and all its health and spiritual and environmental impacts, you have to address those issues, and you have to look at how people are able to access resources. I can, just from my own journey, I don't know who in the city to talk to find out about that lot. A young woman came up to me already, like she has a vision, she don't know who to talk to. If you're not connected, how can you even begin that process? And so right there is inequity. Right there is privilege, granted privilege that people don't have. And so if you have been historically disenfranchised and you have the physical manifestation in your community with, my energy's getting too buzzy or something, where you don't have, the same food as other communities, and other meaning white communities or affluent communities, regardless of the racial, mix. That right there is, how can you even begin, how can you even have the energy to be able to compete, in a workplace scenario, in an educational scenario, when you don't even have access to the nutritional building blocks to be able to function, for our bodies to function. So, to me, at this point, it's all about social justice. When you talk about food and urban agriculture and economic development and community economic development, it had better include a social justice lens, because otherwise nothing's changing. So, that's
I'll just say briefly that for us, it's not really even a question of how do we do urban agriculture work through a justice lens. It's more justice and equity is the work. That is the work. Food is one of the ways that we go about manifesting justice, equity, and empowering communities. But if we're going to have a meaningful movement, the two can't be disconnected. And I think Erica said earlier, all these things are interconnected. I mean, just because we have food access, that doesn't solve the rest of our problems. So we have to look at everything we do through a justice and equity lens, and then tie these different aspects of the larger movement together.
One of the wisest things I ever heard was Damian McShepherd say to me, if people cannot see land, they cannot think about land. If they cannot think about land, they cannot think about the future. And so I see this not only as a movement about growing food and food justice, but also access to democracy, because the idea of democracy is predicated on the idea of a public common. Land that we own in common, that we use in common, whose history is actually about agriculture. And if we can see and learn to negotiate in a physical common, then we can begin to experience ourselves as being part of the idea of a public common that we are invested in and must be engaged in because our survival depends upon it.
I want to add that in the context of element in our faith processes, churches, we are providing advocacy training through core teams within those churches, and the approach is based on self-advocacy. There's so many professional groups in town who advocate for, and what our job is to do is to empower them to advocate for themselves. And as we begin to approach the whole food movement, the approach that we said we would take is from the concept of a program that we're going to run out, which is called Breaking the Cycle, and which is breaking the dependency. And if we don't give our people the skills and abilities to sow for themselves, as our ancestors have done, over the years we're able to build with less. And we must recapture that. But it can't come from the top, but it has to come from within. And so our job is to give them the skills and give us the skills and the tools to set our own destiny and not to allow it to come from outside and then it implodes upon us as opposed to empowering from the middle.
Do we have anyone in the audience who has a question yet?
My question has to deal with the issue around self-empowerment, agency, and the issue around what I've seen is a lot of issues around hegemony, issues around genuflection regarding grants, and issues around paternalism. And it seems to me there are also extensions of that, of our own phenotype. And my question to Malik is, what are the solution bases relevant to that? Because here in Cleveland, I want to overgeneralize this, it appears to be there is a hegemony relevant to interlopers or issues around agency. I've worked on the peripheral of several groups who were doing urban gardening, and they did what Reverend Minor was saying. They imploded because of issues around agency, self-empowerment, which were undermined. Malik, what do you think are the solutions to do that, and also the continuous issue of getting grants from foundations while also having some relevancy and maintaining a paradigm? How do you subvert this paradigm?
That's a big question. I'm not sure I have the answer to it. You know, our movement has two aspects, and one aspect is trying to change the larger society and trying to get the society to behave in a more just and responsible manner. But the other aspect has to do with our own internal development. And so for me, the answer to your question is that within our communities, we need to re-encourage this kind of sense of self-determination and doing for ourselves and creating our own vehicles. And that's not to say we do that in opposition to others, but the only way that we can come to the table strongly is if we have some bonding within our own community. And so I think that's really the key, that we begin to develop the vehicles ourselves within our communities that are focused on our own aspirations, and that, as the Reverend said, those aspirations come, the people in the community to decide what it is they want to do instead of an outside force coming in and imposing that. So I mean, the bottom line is, we've had many teachers who've told us we have to do for self. And for me, that's really the bottom line. We need to stand up and have internal development within our communities and regain this sense of agency that we do have the ability to shape what happens in our lives and in our communities. You start with those who already are galvanized around those ideas. And then what I found is that for most of our people don't see with their third eye. They see with their physical eye. So you have to create concrete models that people can see actually have some impact. And then as those models are created, more people are attracted to those. And then we also have to go out into our communities. We have to do organizing. For the most part, black activists have abandoned organizing. And so we have to go back to, going to, door to door and going to supermarkets and talking to people and going to churches and talking to people and bringing people into these vehicles that we've created. But I think the most important thing is to create models that people can actually see that are functioning, and then we have something we can draw people into.
Good evening. My name is Coyote, and I'm a K student. I just wanted to ask the panel Just a general question. Since Growing Power is the largest and most prominent sort of organization, I'm going to use them as sort of the template, but I was wondering if you members of the panel thought that their approach to tackling the issue of food justice was a viable one for smaller communities trying to build up their own sorts of movements.
All the pieces can be scaled at whatever size a community needs. So whether it's a school garden or whether it's a 50-acre farm, in the city, or it's, somebody's backyard. I mean, the systems are all designed to meet the needs of the people who are operating them. Does that answer your question?
Give an example. So you saw some examples of Growing Power's work in Chicago and Milwaukee, but I live in rural Massachusetts, and the nearest Growing Power affiliate to me, their big bring back, was the bike delivery service, which has really transformed young people's ideas about education, economy, and their right to the city, in addition to doing the work of food justice.
Hi, I have two questions and a comment. I'm going to be brief. I'm a proud person from the projects from 40 years ago, and I think a piece and point that usually don't get used is I think we should have added to our agenda is the policy makers who make policy in the local, city, and county level to let people know who's aboard and helping us. Because if we don't have any policies and the people that we know and can see every day, they can help us. Another thing with people in the projects, and like I said, I was in there 40 years ago, you have to have somebody near and dear to you. We can talk all day long, but they need to see people actually day to day. And every project in Cleveland, I'm speaking about Cleveland, we got 5 projects in Cleveland. If they don't see the people every day, they're just saying them against us. So I think y'all should consider having places and people in the project identify 6 good people, a Miss Mary or Mr. Fred, that can go and talk to the people on a regular basis, which you agree. My other concern, I was diagnosed with a disease November the 22nd, 2012. So health is always an issue for me. I think we should have a slogan stating that everybody can say they know somebody who's sick and tired, and I don't want to be sick and tired. I think we should have some type of slogan so people can identify with and people can understand, especially people in the projects, because I don't want them to say, oh yeah, we had a nice conference, and the people who you trying to reach are not a part of it. So in the future, please consider having people that is a Miss Jones or Mr. Fred that's every day that people can see, and then we can grow as a nation, because each one can teach one. Thank you.
I believe that what you said really is, you made 2 really important points. And the way we've been operating as a foundation in the community is exactly that way, that we've been in the Woodland Hills community, interfacing with the people on a day-to-day basis and allowing them to come up with ideas that will help them to become a more productive, sustainable community, that they're interacting and connecting with other parts of the neighborhood. So your approach in terms of being in the community, face-to-face with the community, hearing what the community has to say, and our approach has been that whatever work we do should be community envisioned, community implemented, and community sustained, and that we are undergirding the things that the community envisions with the resources that we have as a foundation, but allowing the community to self-direct in the work and the projects, the initiatives, the policy activities that they want to engage in, and that's the reason that we have Policy Bridge and other people embedded in the community to help them figure out how they want to move forward. So I just want to affirm your statement and let you know that many of us are trying to approach our work in that way.
I'm impressed by the quote of the farmer, who I forget his name, who said that growing his own food was like printing his own money. And I'm impressed by the food movement's ability to engage young Black males. And I'm just interested to know, as we revisited the determinants of health, to what extent are city planners taking into consideration the needs of young Black males to be engaged at the level of their environment, socially, economically, for work and for play. And as I drive past my lots, walk past my lots, I see young Black males who are not engaged, who are not working, and their needs are not being accounted for on this level, and for right now going on a couple generations. So I'm just wondering, at what level do city planners, and do we consider the social determinants of health as it relates to young black men?
That's an interesting question. Let me just kind of provide some context. Typically, as city planners, we've always kind of dealt with physical development and zoning and things of that nature. Zoning was established to kind of deal with sort of the human impacts that existed in places early on. And we have a sort of natural marriage to looking at things through a human health lens. Over time, as profit became more important than people, that chasm grew. And for a while, we've gotten away from really focusing on sort of the human element of neighborhood revitalization. In changing trajectory now, and really understanding that if we're going to have sustainable communities, that we have to understand people and how place and how social, economic, and environmental conditions impact them. Our department in particular in Cleveland has recognized, our limitations. And those limitations lies in the need for or not having certain expertise. And this is why I go back to the critical need for partnerships, particularly those with people like health departments, for other departments in the city of Cleveland that actually deal directly with challenges that young African-American males face in the community. I'll give you one tangible example of an analysis that we did when we completed the city's comprehensive plan. We started to sort of take this notion of going beyond bricks and mortar really seriously. And we started to use GIS mapping to start to identify areas where you had large, significant numbers of individuals who were at-risk youth, where crime was at a high level, and we can begin to see sort of these spatial patterns as to sort of where certain conditions from a social standpoint existed. The reason why that information was relevant, because we were then able to work in those communities and plan accordingly, listening and addressing and hearing from those individuals who were at risk to talk about the type of opportunities that need to be created in the communities in which they live. So the first part of that was really sort of opening up our minds and ears, number one, and not going out and sort of talking at people, and then really hearing about sort of what these sort of needs were when it comes to sort of youth and other folks in the neighborhood. We kind of took what I would call an anthropological approach. It took us 5 years to do the city's comprehensive plan, and it took us 5 years because we integrated with the community and became part of the systems that existed within those neighborhoods, so we can get a true pulse on what was happening. And I think that was the innovation in what we did as a planning department, because we started to really articulate in our city's comprehensive plan things that were just not physical development related. And that was a seed change, I think, for us. And that began us, it helped us get on the trajectory of looking at things sort of through that sort of human scale and that human lens. So I'm just gonna end it by saying, we as a planning department are constantly evolving. And as society changes and systems change in society, we always need to account for that, which will always keep me employed.
We have Reverend Tony Minor, and then Erica Allen wants to respond.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the young African-American black males that I've worked with my whole career want jobs. They want meaningful work to do, and options. So that's been, I mean, that's been the consistent theme, and so that's driven my work of how can we cash flow, how can we scale up to be able to provide more of those community-based jobs, because I think the community-based component is really important. There's nothing more transformative to have a young person who is looked at as a detriment in the community, and that same environment transform who they are and transform the environment and be the catalyst in that, and to do that with a lot of support. And that just has huge ripple effects. For our guys I have one kid, which, it's a heartbreaking story, but he got shot twice in the head in January, and survived and is back at work. Just amazing stuff. I mean, in the face of trauma and just extraordinary pressure and, just challenges in the environment, for kids to be able to have the support system to be that resilient. So, I feel that, city agencies, that's their responsibility, and I think that it's the first line of defense in a community. So, if our young people aren't being supported, and that's in these real ways, we have serious problems.
I just want to add a couple of points here, because Policy Bridge has done a lot of work in relation to conditions and how they affect African American males in communities. And one of the things that we have come to believe is that, excuse me, we can do a lot of changing systemically, but we also have to change ourselves. And that means that we have to come together as a real community and start to understand what are the barriers and challenges that impede our African American males from being successful, and what is our contribution to that. And then how do we devise strategies, tactics, and engage them in a way that they can see a different way, understand a different way, believe in a different way. What we have now is a lack of hope, and we must reinstill hope before we can get change. So from my perspective, that's not something a system can do for you. That's something people do for other people, and we have to start to engage people at the people level.
So we have Reverend Tony Minor who wants to jump in, and Sandy, I want to add to this question while we're on it, and then we're going to take a few more questions in succession and then allow you to answer some of those questions and move towards our closing. Since we're talking about black males, can we also talk about gender dynamics in the urban food movement, in the processes, in the leadership roles, and where young black women are as well, and how we are addressing their needs?
I wanted to just speak back to the issue of the black males, but young people in general. I talked about that cultural memory, and one of the things that we're doing in the context of the African American Church, these faith hubs that we're working with, we're piloting this summer a program called Big Mommas House, and it's an intergenerational dialogue between young people and elders, and the goal is to try to break that isolation, alienation that exists within young people, the hopelessness that was just expressed, and to try to pull down and tap from the expertise that I think that's hidden. There are treasures that are hidden within the context of our churches and the places where we live. We have identified within churches, these were hidden elderly men who had worked with George Washington Carver, worked farms. They were very successful in their young years in dealing with some of the things that we are talking about now. And there's a great need to really connect these young people with their destiny and the strength that's there within our families, and I think that's an area that is untapped, and I think that can be one of the most important strategies to address black males and certainly address young people in general.
I think one of the other things that we have to get back to as a community in general is the fundamental issue of education. And if we can't keep our, well, thank you for the few people who are, and it ties back, I think, in part to what Greg and what Reverend Minor said about hope. we have to keep our kids connected to solid educational opportunities, because that is one of the fundamental principles for how we create opportunity for ourselves in America. And if we somehow can figure out either how to rid ourselves of the urban myth that education maybe is not for African American males, or whatever else is driving them to a different mode of operation without connecting to the educational system and getting the things that they need so that they can create opportunity for themselves. So I think, you know, part of the answer, I can't even remember who raised the question now about black males, is that we need to make sure that we keep them connected to a solid educational system.
I'd like to contest some of this. My experience as I talk with folks, particularly folks who are engaged in both urban and rural agriculture, has been that there are male spokespeople for organizations that are almost entirely populated by female labor. My experience talking with folks in the urban ag movement often want to talk about the experience of young black men without talking about the experience of young black women who have an entirely different experience of land, do not experience land as safety, do not experience land as territory they can cross unmolested, do not have space to talk about what it means to grow when part of that is about developing physical power. So I would encourage us to take growing, this movement around growing, as an opportunity to unseat some of our long-held assumptions about gender and gardening. I would like to remind us that it wasn't just grandmama, and I just also feel a need as a person who is 50 years old to say that was my grandmama. I'm somebody's grandmama now. So that's where that knowledge is really held. The grandmama who knew what to go pick out of the backyard garden was probably married to a grandpa who knew how to grow. And so we need to restore the truth to our conversation about gender so that we can grow in truth.
Yes, my name is Aid Hightower, and my question was about the growing powers that are going on in Detroit and Chicago. And I was wondering if there are any growing powers here in Cleveland that we in the community could get involved in, like a garden or a farm locally that we can have our hands on and experience.
Ridall, you want to stand up? So maybe, young man, maybe you can be
Hello, my name is David Hester. I'm known as Dr. Greenhand in the comic book. I'm the one that probably, if you really want to learn how to really grow compost and how to really grow vegetables, I'm the one that you'll see down there. Then here's Keelan. He's the one that'll probably teach you how to eat it, cook it, and everything you need to do with it once it comes up out of the ground. Okay. And,
So if we have any burning closing remarks on stage, we'll take those, and then we're going to transition. Kim is going to give us final closing remarks. Kim? You have final closing remarks? Okay, we're going to take the burning comments, and I'm going to say thank you to everybody after we take the burning comments. Burning comment? Any closing?
We respond to the sister who was talking about the media and just say that.
And please don't forget the women. We didn't talk about women.
Okay, we have, well, if I can get more time, we have some folks doing some alternative media in Detroit. I just want to encourage people to go to Google Pathways to Food Justice, a video that some young people just put out in Detroit, and young people can speak better to young people sometimes than older people can. And there's another one called Food Fight that a lot of people are familiar with around the country. And then also in terms of the gender question, I'll say for our organization, gender equity is an explicit value. Our board is entirely African women, and at the farm, we have really changed how we, looking at the roles of people at the farm, and there's whoever can do work gets it done, whether they're male or female.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate your presence. We will continue the conversation. Remember to have, if we have your email, you will be getting further correspondence from us, and we will be following up with other events, workshops, lectures, and things like that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.